projects, but also hoping to answer some Q&A from the community. So we can start off with some questions. As always, put it in the chat and we're happy to answer them. And we're going to talk about game development and stuff. So Tim, how should we kick off today? What would you like? What words of wisdom do you have for us?
So first of all, I think a lot of times we put the Q&A at the end, and we've got Lucy here, our wonderful community manager. She can't talk, but she's here to hang out. And if anybody has any questions that they want to get out of the way, because I know we've got a lot of cool stuff that we always share in courses and online and all this different stuff. If anybody has anything they specifically want to ask, I think starting off with Q&A would be kind of cool, and flipping it on its head and doing it first. Specifically, if Lucy can still type in the chat, so if you guys have anything that you want,
it's also a little bit. It seems a little bit suspicious, doesn't it? That Lucy is like, "Oh, sorry, you guys, the microphone just doesn't. I really would love to say some things, but hello, it's not on." So,
but yeah, she can't talk back to you, Rick. Though she can't.
Okay, I'm gonna start one of those conversations in the chat. Can you just vote whether you think the issue is some sort of legitimate technical issue, or do you think it's because Lucy is using a Mac? Like, which of those two do you think it is? And I've got my suspicions on what's going on here. So not to start that, but
are we starting a PC versus Mac within the first 5 minutes?
I think we should. I think when we've got 2 PC people and 1 Mac person, the Mac person can't talk. What better time?
That's a great we are not biased at all. It's awesome. Fine. This is the internet.
Yeah.
So any questions, pop them in the chat. We can answer anything that anybody wants to know. If it's course related, that's great. If it's not, if it's just game dev related, that's totally cool too. But I think while we're waiting for questions, we can pop off a little bit about talking about longer projects if you wanted to, Rick.
Yeah, let's talk about longer projects.
Okay, so one of the things that I want to say right up front with longer projects is it sucks because quicker projects are much more compatible with getting things done. When you're a beginner, they're easier to make. But longer projects a lot of times are required for more complex games. And guess what most people want to make? They want to make more complex games. So I would say one of the immediate pros of longer projects is the complexity with which you can make projects, right? So you can have bigger systems, you can have more effects, you can have all this stuff. But that complexity at the same time is also a con, because if you don't know or understand a lot of programming or how stuff works, complexity within a system like that, within a game, within a project, can also come back to bite you, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think you've got to be ready for the size of project you take on as well. Because if you take on a massive project and you're not ready for it, then it can eat away at your soul a little bit, destroy you. You've got to be, it's the whole, make sure you walk before you run type thing. So one of the downsides of a big project is it can block you from developing and improving if you take on something too big, particularly if you take on a game that's too big for you. And how do you know if it's too big? I think if you look at it and you say, I don't know how to do any of this, maybe it's too big.
Yeah, I do think there's some healthiness in taking on challenges that you don't know how to do, because I think it's how you learn. But I think a lot of the problem with something like game development is game development by itself is already a massive undertaking, right? So then you don't know how to do a thing and you say, I'm going to take on this big project to do this thing, but you really don't know what you don't know. You think that thing is so massive that it's a 10 out of 10, but really it's so massive that it's 153 out of 10. You know what I mean? And it's like, you have no idea. You think you equate those things to be the same thing because you just dive into the project and you think you can get stuff done. But I think specifically when you are working on larger projects, motivation is much more of an issue. Like, you have to keep it up for a longer term. You have to do stuff for a long time. And there's a lot of boring parts on bigger games, right? Like, if you are, racing a car on the weekends, that's fun. But like, if you're racing professionally, you also have to fully understand the whole system. You have to take apart the car and rebuild the car. You have to make sure your engine is up to scratch and all that stuff. And it's a very different kind of deal when you're doing it longer term. So it's something to keep in mind.
Speaking of big programs, sorry, big things. I don't see your Discord announcement. It's telling everyone to come hang out.
I oh, I didn't do it. I did. Oh my god.
Oh my God, Tim!
I hit
Technical.
the button and I forgot it did the warning and
Did
not
it pop up
send.
with a? Would you like to send this to PC or Mac
Yes.
devices?
No,
Oh
it
goodness.
didn't.
Anyway, you know what? I appreciate everyone who comes along and hangs out with us and wrestles with the technical difficulties, because this is what it is in today's day and age. To do anything, uh, you've got to wrestle with technology, and making games, you're wrestling with technology. And what we try to show, I know we talk about this week in, week out. It's a little bit of a broken record, but by Tim and I just putting ourselves out there and showing our technical difficulties and showing our, our strengths and weaknesses and all that kind of jazz, to show that there's no perfect approach. And often when we create courses, we've already prototyped it, we've thought about it, we've practiced it, we've recorded it 2 or 3 times, we've changed, we found an issue and redone it. So it can look like we just get everything right the first time. And I think there's a lot of YouTubers out there who do that. You're like, these people just, they're so much
Yeah.
better than me. They just get it right the first time. And it's completely not the truth. And as you can see with our live casts, there's constantly a new thing popping up, or something that's happened, or a mistake, or Lucy's microphone won't work for her. So uh, so these things come up, and I think if anyone's out there with the classic imposter syndrome conversation, that we all, none of us are perfect, none of us have the answer, none of us are great at doing all the things. And as soon as you put yourself out there and do something slightly different, you're going to be starting from not perfect. So anyway, let's
I
make
think a
everything a lesson, a learning opportunity.
a big point there though, Rick, that cannot be underestimated is the fact that most people do not share their mistakes.
Mm.
And that's a big part of the imposter syndrome, like you talked about. When you see these YouTube videos, when you see even GDC talks, honestly, like people love GDC talks. But the problem is those talks are by people that are talking about things they did 3 or 4 years ago. And it's really easy to say, oh yeah, so we planned this out and it was great. And like at first it didn't work out, but it was fine. Like they're missing 1,000 details and 1,000 times they failed, 1,000 things that went wrong. You know what I mean? So it makes it seem like they know what they're doing. And then when you go in, you nothing works. You think, oh, I'm not like them because my stuff is all broken and their stuff just worked the first time. But it didn't work the first time. They went through that whole iteration cycle. And it's dangerous because it does make it look easy, like YouTubers, especially like, yeah, so I did this and I made a game in a weekend and it was super awesome. And then like, oh, I could do that too. And then you make a game and it's like half of a dude running and sort of moving forward. And it's like, oh man, why am I doing this? It's discouraging.
So, question, Tim, from Cantankerous Games, whom we know. You can't always do everything yourself. Any tips for keeping other people engaged over a long project?
Yeah. Weirdly enough, I think Cantankerous is more qualified on that than I am. He runs a team. But I think you need buy-in from a team. I don't think a go here, do this kind of infrastructure will work for longer term, right? Like people get bored. People need some kind of investment in a thing that they're making. And investment, I think, includes making some of the decisions, having some of the freedom to do stuff in those projects. Because if I think the creative part for game dev for a lot of people is the more fun part. And I think if people, especially people that like look up to you as far as the team goes, if they see you as doing all the fun stuff and they're doing all the boring stuff, like that's not fair, right? And that just comes off as like, hold on, what's going on? But if you trust them and you have them, weigh into the scenario and contribute in ways that they find fun and engaging anyway, I think you can kind of keep people engaged over a longer period because they're interested in the thing that you're having them do versus just assigning tasks to people like they're soulless entities, right? But building a
Yeah.
thing together is fun.
Yeah. I think if you're on a team, the number one thing to ask people is, why are you doing this? And what would you like to get out of this process? And sometimes people are very clear. Sometimes people aren't. They don't know what they want out of it. But but a lot of the times people will say, yeah, I'm working on this particular game or big project because I really want to such and such. I want to get this experience. I want to get this credit on my resume. I want to do a thing I've always dreamt of doing. And I think the person who says, oh, I don't know, they're the person that you need to find a role within that big project that they're interested in and excited by. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah, the people you, I think this is repeating what you were saying, Tim, but as someone who's guiding the team, whether you're the leader or the director or whatever on the project, you need to have that conversation with everyone individually and just make sure that they know why they're joining this long project. They know what they're getting out of it and they're clear on it, and then you can help them get that. I think that's really important. That's what feeds all of the stuff. If you get there like, radio
Right.
team, here's our goals, or here's the cool thing, if it's coming from you, then it may or may not land. It needs to come from that person themselves.
Yeah. And we kind of embody that at GameDev.tv. Like, we obviously there's business stuff that needs to be done, but we all talk about like what excites us personally, and we kind of tackle those projects. So,
but then we have to put our clothes on anyway, and we can't just do do all the things that excite us. I do want to mention again for anyone joining us that Lucy's microphone is broken because of some sort of permission issues, because she's on a Mac and Macs are the root cause of all evil. And we asked her just to hang out here for a bit anyway, so folks can see Lucy, understand that Lucy oversees all things to do with our community. So there's times where writing a complaint like, Rick, you suck, is like, oh, please take this up with Lucy. Or, why on earth did this happen? Oh, Lucy's the person who can answer all your questions. So Lucy is the person. There is a person called Lucy. I know a lot of organizations, it'll be some sort of, teenager in a basement answering questions. And they're like, this is Veronica. And you're like, are you really Veronica? So Lucy is real. She's not a paid actress that we just had come and join our video stream. Although, given that
this doesn't help because people have asked us to prove that she's real before. Rick and I made Lucy up, but just having someone not talk, I think doesn't.
I know it's kind of, but it's not us. Yeah. Oh my god. There's so much that can go wrong with this whole. Lucy's not allowed to speak. Lucy's absolutely allowed to speak. It's just technical issues.
We're glad she's here, and we really want her on the podcast because she's such a huge part of GameDev.tv, and she just goes unseen most of the time. And she's been a big part of the team. And maybe next time we can have her on here and have technology working. It'll be great.
Absolutely. So yeah, Lucy, stick around for as long as you want, and then feel free to exit or keep playing around with the microphone settings and turning it off and on and plugging it in and out and all that kind of stuff, and Googling and ordering a PC. Maybe it'll get here in time. All right, that's my one last kick of the Mac versus PC.
Amazon's pretty quick.
I wish Ben was here. He'd get fired up by that stuff. He's a hardcore Mac boy. He'd love it. You're like, well, technically, Rick, Macs are a lot more stable. Yeah, the microphones don't work though.
Andy wants to ask, what team size is the perfect balance between splitting the work and keeping the vision when it comes to a big long-term project? Okay, so off the bat, one of the things by far that newer team builders or game developers or anybody kind of in a field gets wrong is the terminology and the communication. So like part of the problem with the question to begin with is that you're asking what is the perfect balance team size? One, there is no perfect balance. Two, like what is a big long-term project? How big, how long-term, right? Like there's a lot of details in there that you need to define. And the problem is when you say long-term project, somebody that only does 2-month projects thinks a long-term project is 4 months, but somebody that's been in AAA thinks a long-term project is 6 years. So you really have to define your terms. You have to be as specific as possible when you're asking stuff like, especially like when you're communicating with a team. Like I'm not saying like in your questions to us, please be specific as possible. I'm saying specifically like when you're communicating with a team and you're asking if they want to be part of a long-term project, you got to know the details on that stuff and you're probably going to go longer than you think you are. There definitely is a point where the team gets so big that it loses some of its soul, but I don't think that that's like a magic number. I think it more has to do with culture and speed and buy-in from the team and just the way that the team is run. First, because you can lose that stuff at 3 people if you are very like top-down kind of management style. So it really depends on how you treat the team. I do think at some point teams stop operating effectively as a group and need some sort of management structure, but I don't know. I would say beyond 4 or 5, it gets more and more complicated to kind of run a group run team, if that makes sense. Because yeah, the vision too specifically, I think, is a part of every person in the team. So it's very fluid and all that stuff.
I also want to talk about the project that starts off as a I don't know what size of project it is and goes until it's done. So this is a lot more of the agile sprint based philosophy.
Yeah,
And I think a lot of people do this in their own shape or form. Sometimes it's a bit loose. I'm just going to start on a thing and then I don't know, I'm still working on it. So you want to get some structure around it. But the way I really like to approach games is start with the most important feature first and just get that working and have that be an enjoyable experience. And more often than not, that is control, movement of your character or the way that you're interacting with your particular game world. So let's say it's movement. If running and jumping and, pivoting and sidestepping is engaging and interesting, and you're like, oh, I could do this all day, then you've got a good foundation for a game. So you start with that and you say, okay, that's my project, just making the movement. But what we do a lot of the times is we allow our brain, our designer brain, to go off into, and then in level 37, we have the troglodytes arrive. I don't even, where did I get that from? I don't know. I
troglodytes.
stole that from some show. It's probably Rick and Morty. Everything seems to come into my brain from Rick and Morty. So that's when level 37, and then you this, but then you've got the magical special power up ability that's going to allow you to do the area of effect spell. You're like, okay, that you're excited about the potential of your game or where it's going to be able to get to, but you need to put that all in the backlog or the ice box, whatever particular agile system you're using. Icebox is like, I don't know, stop thinking about it, stop talking about it. Backlog is we're going to get to it in priority. Here's my 10 backlog things. Which one is next? And then our current sprint is what we're doing at the moment. So if you go through that flow of saying, okay, I'm really excited about all these things in the ice box, it's going to distract you from what you need to do now. And you're going to be putting in a little bit of that combat system before the character controls feel good for even moving. So start with
Yeah,
movement. And I guarantee you there's a lot of successful games out there that had this massive vision, but got maybe 2 or 3 features in movement and combat and procedural generation levels. And they said, you know what? This is actually pretty good. Let's stop here. This is big enough. Let's start to polish this. So I think you can talk about a big project in terms of features. You can talk about a big project in terms of the amount of time that it takes. It's not necessarily that it has to be huge with a lot of features and take a lot of time. I think the best way to make a game is to make a small number of features and then to polish those small number of features, to tune them, to improve them, to balance them, etc., until it's a really super engaging experience. That would be my recommendation on that. In terms of not starting a big project, but starting a small
yeah.
project that could potentially grow.
I think you brought up a good point with sprints, though. I think we should kind of talk a little bit about waterfall agile stuff too, because and actually, this is stuff that I've just learned too, because Alyssa is going through project management certification and teaching me all this cool, fancy stuff. But basically, there's kind of 2 main philosophies on planning a project. One of them is waterfall, where you kind of plan everything from the top down and then just divvy up the tasks. The other one is like agile, where you work on a thing and then you have sprint periods of like 2 weeks and you build one piece of it and then you wait until the end of the sprint period to plan the next sprint and so on and so forth. So agile is what it sounds like. It's agile in kind of its whole system, whereas waterfall is kind of top down. So the larger project, especially with software, especially with teams, a more agile approach tends to work better because you have more freedom versus you can't really plan everything out ahead of time. But
I
yeah,
heard
that's what
I
it
heard a
was.
mouse click
Is
just
that
now, Tim.
did Lucy fix her audio?
I fixed audio.
Oh
Yeah! Celebrate in the
Wow.
chat.
Oh, you went and grabbed someone else's PC and chucked your MacBook out the
Stop
window.
now.
Stop it. I did say the last one. Lucy, so good to have you here. Welcome. Thank you for getting the microphone working and persisting. I know you're like, you guys, I'm going to bed. Oh, my microphone's not working. It's like, no. Come hang out with us. So seriously, 100% now. Questions, bombard them. What would you like to know from Lucy, about Lucy, to do with Lucy, Lucy's role, GameDev.tv, anything to do with our community, managing, keeping bozos like us in line, all that kind of stuff. Questions, please.
Look at this
for
chat light up.
Lucy.
Lucy's a
Look at it. Everyone's
star.
like, yay, this is the best, the best for it's been years since this live chat has been so good.
Just don't ask me any mic technical questions. But other than that,
I'm guessing you're the
I
expert
don't know.
in
You
that
should,
now.
yeah, you just figured all that out.
My first question is, what did you do to fix it?
I rebooted Chrome. I updated and rebooted, and
Oh, wow.
Turning it off and on again.
Yeah,
exactly. I
thing.
turned it off. I turned it on
yeah.
again.
Well, I know you said you only had half an hour, so thanks for joining us today, Lucy. And
Yeah, it's been good. Next time.
nice. There you go. Well, there's a lesson in persistence, isn't it?
People are saying thank you for
persisting.
sending the emails. Everybody loves the wonderful emails.
That's
Yeah.
nice.
So, Lucy, I've got a question for you. What would you say is the biggest piece of feedback that you hear from our community, aside from Rick's garbage, please make him speak less, or those kind of things? What do you hear, and where do you hear it from? Like, where are you deriving feedback from the community and input from the community?
Oh, that's a good one. Lots of places. I think I hang out a lot on Twitter, so I get to hear lots of things over on there from the community, which is always awesome to see the progress that people make from when they start tweeting us and they're early on their game projects or their Blender models, and then they go on and develop them more. That's always a very cool journey to see. And then emails, people respond to my emails and ask things and say nice things and ask questions. I don't know that we've got one overarching thing that I hear all the time. Just, everybody loves your dad jokes. There's been a long standing request for you to release a book of them.
Oh,
so
really?
there's that. Yeah. And lots of questions for you to create this draggy dog. Is that
no.
Surely you were briefed.
Lucy,
surely
Lucy's
you read
audio's
you read
cutting
the
out. We
briefing
can't.
document, didn't you, Lucy? Avocado
Really?
Fire has sent you a briefing document to supersede our briefing document. Yes, I've heard of this draggy dog, and
yeah.
I think, Lucy, you may have heard as well that we've got a game jam coming up in May, and I think based upon your specific request that you, Lucy, have requested that it's going to be themed as draggy animal. That's the whole. You can choose whatever animal you want, so long as it's a dog. That's going to be the whole thing. Tim has been adamant that this is what it
theme
has
has
to
not
be.
been announced yet, and it will not be announced until the beginning of the jam. Don't get people started on draggy dog games.
You know what? No matter what the theme is, the theme could be no animals allowed. I'm having a dog dragging its butt around in my game, Tim, no matter what.
Yeah.
So
the theme of no animals allowed, I'll take that into consideration.
No animals allowed.
No poop
Did I
jokes.
tell you? I kind of feel like we did have this, that I did tell you this already on a live cast. Did I tell you the librarian joke?
Not on a live cast.
Oh,
you told it on a meeting.
Okay. Well, really quick. I don't think I've ever found anyone who's laughed at it. Aside from my brother, he laughed at it. He's like, he did me a solid. So, because you want a dad joke, right? So I stole this joke. This is not mine. I didn't make this up. So this guy walks into a library, and we'll call him Tim just because we need a name. I'm sure I told this on a live cast. Sorry if you guys already heard this. Walks into the library and he says, I'd like a hamburger with fries, please. Sorry, he said it better than that. I'd like a hamburger with fries, please. And the librarian, we'll call her Lucy, looks at him and says, this is a library. and he says, "Oh, sorry, I'd like a hamburger with fries, please." Huh? There we go.
I'm just kidding. I made you tell a joke twice.
Did we tell on the live cast already? Are you?
How to get Rick to
High five, Tim.
Okay, you got me. You got me. That's good. Okay. I got this other joke. I've got this other joke. It's about this guy walks into a library.
Oh no!
Again and again.
This is going to become the draggy dog of jokes.
I know. Anyway, what are we talking about? Talking about projects. Big projects, small projects.
Long-term projects.
Long-term projects.
Just like Rick's joking skills.
Yeah. Well, we mentioned Game Jam before. Someone was saying, "Oh, I'm scared about the Game Jam." The whole thing is that there's no such thing as a bad entry into a Game Jam. And we're talking about small projects versus large projects. What do you get out of a small project? Say you see the Game Jam, like, oh, I'm going to give this a go. I'm going to take whatever Project Boost that you've worked on. And I've got this because we're talking about Project Boost in the chat before. And you tweak it a little bit. You add a little bit of different art that you make yourself, and you tune the game a little bit. That's it. Boom. And then you submit it. The thing particularly with a GameDev.tv Game Jam, is no one is going to look at it and say, how dare you do that? We're going to be like, celebrating. That's great. Fantastic. Well done. So the purpose of these small projects is to get into the habit of completing what you're doing, of finishing it. So don't look at a Game Jam and say that's scary. There's not going to be judging. Oh, look, Tim looks like he wants permission to do a thing. There's not going to be judging from the point of view of, should you have submitted it, yes or no? Tim's going to be playing a lot of the games and chatting about them and saying, the bits that stand out and how you can improve and all that kind of stuff. So there's no reason not to participate, I think.
Yeah. So we've modeled this whole thing around beginners because we know we teach courses on how to make game dev, and game jams can be super fun, easy games. They could be super big, complex games, but we know that a lot of people are afraid of the first jam. So we just want to clarify, like, don't be afraid, submit whatever you can, join it. It'll be fun. But like Rick mentioned, we have this thing called a Game Jam Starter Kit, which is super, super useful. If you go to the jam page that we just clicked, this Game Jam Starter Kit will get you 4 different source projects for different types of projects. We have a first-person one in there. We've got a platformer. We've got a racing game. And those are freely available, which means you can use them in your game. And they're basically starter projects. So you can start with those and get a game up and running. So we've kind of done the core little part of figuring out, how do you make the car move? We've done that for you, and they have documentation and all that stuff in there. So if you don't know where to start messing around with those projects and figure something out. Obviously, the Game Jam doesn't start until May 20th, so you can't actually begin on anything you're going to submit. You have to start it on May 20th, but we've got that available for people that are new to game jams and they might be a little bit scared. So.
Yeah, and I think as well, it allows you to get some of those ideas out of your system as well. If you're working on a long project, bring it back to the core conversation today. If you're working on a big project, sometimes the shiny things come along and you're like, oh, wow, I wish I could do explosions, but I'm making a card trading game. It's just not relevant to blow up barrels. And then you take a few days just to mess around with some mechanics and blow up some barrels. So you can do a small project to help keep the energy in your large project.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. There's so many times where I've been working on, so my last game took 4 years to make. Battle Barn Tactics is like 2 years in. And I would not have been able to make those games if I didn't make 30 some other games in game jams along the way, because I just have so many ideas of stuff that I want to make. And it's like, I can't just stick to one project if I couldn't get it out of my system. But the other part of that too, is that sometimes you make a thing that you weren't expecting to make, because the theme is random, right? Like, you don't know what the theme's going to be. So you end up making a game based on a theme, and it's completely different than anything you would make normally. So you end up with a thing, and sometimes you fall in love with that thing. Like Battle Barn Tactics is my current game, and that game came from a game jam. It was called Barn Battles, It was the Game Jam game I made, and the idea was like, what if I could make a bunch of barn animals fight on a chessboard? Right, that was what I did, and then I made that, and I fell in love with it, and I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll just make it a commercial project. So it turned into a larger project because I saw the potential, and I kind of did what Rick suggested, of like starting with the core of the thing, right? Started with the movement, started with the turn-based system, and that's what game jams help you do. Is it helps you get kind of that big project, not scope, but like it gives you slices of the process of every piece of it. So you get design, development, and then you get production, and then you actually get publishing experience as well, because you got to upload your game, you got to put the stuff there, you got to design the little itch page, make it look pretty. So you kind of get a sliver of experience all the way down the pipeline, which I think is super useful.
Yeah, cool. So, Lucy, I know you've done a bunch of asking our community who they are, what stage of the journey they're at. In our emails, we ask that question a bit. What can you tell us? So, just a little bit of the people who are here watching today, the most keen of, I think, of our community. But what do we know about our community and who they are and where they are with their game development journey?
I think most people who take our courses, when they first join us, are hobbyists. So they've not done any game development before. They maybe watched a tutorial or two on YouTube, but they're kind of coming to us without that experience. And often we have camps. Like, we have people who have grown up playing games, and they want to be able to make games to play with their kids, or because that's the thing that they want to do in their spare time. And then we have another set that are people who want to go into that in a kind of indie dev or professional manner. The majority are hobbyists, but obviously, like, we had Antonia on a couple of weeks ago, and she'd never done any sort of development at all and took the course, and now she works at Unity. And we see stories like that. We've had people go to Ubisoft, we've had people go to Naughty Dog, we've had people get publisher deals and do things after taking our courses, which is awesome. And then we've had lots of people who have also made the game they always wanted to make, that they now play with their kids, and did the thing they always had in their head that they wanted to set out and do, which is also very awesome.
Yep. Yeah, that's cool. And it's always good. We love hearing from folks in the community and what they're up to, and particularly success stories. So I think a lot of these come to you, Lucy, in terms of, hey, I got a job and just wanted to say thanks to you guys. So it's good to hear that from you as well, that people are out there, they've got something they're up to, and they take some courses and then they get a job. It's like, it can happen. It's doable.
Very doable. Yeah, and or release their game on Steam, or lots of wins that are
What's the best way if someone's released a game on Steam, or have got a job, or have done something cool? Maybe you can tell us if there's any other cool things we want to hear from people about. What's the best way for them to let you know, hey, I did a thing? And are you happy to hear from people saying I did a thing?
Oh, I love to hear from people saying I did a thing. It's my favorite part of what I do, is that I did a thing. And it's awesome. We all this because we circulate it within the team and go, hey, so and so did a thing, and we talk about it on Slack, or we round robin the email. It's that's awesome. They can email me, Lucy at GameDev.tv, or they can tag me on Twitter at GameDev.tv, and let me know. And that's awesome. And then we can share it with people, and if they want to write about their experience, we can put it. We've got quite a lot of our student stories on the blog, where we share journeys people going on, or we can get them on here, like we did with Antonio, and Todd was on a couple of weeks ago as well. Other things awesome people go on to do is they come and work with us. Like, Gary was a student. I think all of our TAs were students. We have other people who were students who might be instructors, who might be listening now. So loads of a massive variety of ways that people can use what they learn in the courses later on in their lives.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. And
sure.
we do try to people who have worked through our courses and been in our community, we do try to work with them more to become instructors, to become teaching assistants, and to help people not get stuck and all that stuff. So yeah, super cool.
Yeah, also, yeah, shout out to KB and Jamie as well, who are student evangelists and support people. They both came from within the community. Yeah, we're just like big fans of ours, and now now they help people not get stuck. So yeah, it's very cool.
We're just one big happy family.
We are, aren't we?
One big happy dysfunctional family. Actually, we're not as interesting as being dysfunctional. I think we're pretty functional. We're pretty normal.
Functional.
I think we try to think we're edgy and eccentric and, you know, doing radical stuff, but I think we're just normal, good people, sadly.
Yeah. I think it's like when you try, you know this feeling, right? Because when you try and tell your joke to younger people thinking that you're being very cool and edgy.
I like when Lucy can talk.
fun.
This is fun.
Yeah,
This is
where's
it's not just a one-way Rick
Where's
fest.
that mute button going? Oops, did I accidentally click the mute button again? Yeah, thank you, Lucy, for coming on to your only ever live cast. Nice.
You know,
if I knew that's what I had to do.
Yes. Yeah.
Bringing back to the whole project thing, I
Fine.
think a big part of the disconnect I think a lot of students face, because we've seen this before, is a lot of students will go through courses and they learn a lot, but then they immediately try to take on a big project thinking like, oh, I streamlined, I went through this course pretty quick, it was fine, I learned, so let me take on this big stuff. But the courses are designed to kind of get you up and running with a thing, but they don't include kind of the iteration time or the debugging time or the, you know, how do I solve this time, right? Like it's kind of prototyped and project is laid out for you. So they don't include the game design either, right? Like this is how we design the game, and then you just kind of follow along. So I think there's a big disconnect between going through your first course and kind of starting your first project, because you don't know what you don't know. You don't know the big chunks of stuff that you're not going to be able to tackle because there's no course there for that stuff. So I think while big projects are very beneficial, I think as your first project, if you're just starting out with courses, I think the smaller you can make a project, the better. And carrying it all the way to completion to really understand how long that tiny project that you think is going to take 2 days actually takes, I think is very, very beneficial to kind of your whole deal.
I think when you're starting out, transitioning from sort of being a hobbyist into now I want to make games and finish them, I think it's good to have a game 1, game 2, game 3 philosophy with what you're doing. Game 1 should take you a few weeks, maybe a month, and it's just for you, maybe for your friends. You're not trying to sell it. You're not trying to make money out of it. You're not trying to have any sort of critical acclaim. You might publish it on Steam. You might publish it on itch. You might just have it as a web build that you give to your friends. That's for you. The next project you can expand a little bit. It might be a couple of months you're working on it, and you do try that mechanism of launching it, of telling people about it, of creating a GIF or two and showing them, and starting to practice a little bit that marketing conversation as well. Getting feedback as you're making your project. Don't just do it in isolation, but do a build, get some feedback on it, etc. And then practicing that kind of launch mechanism. And then game 3 is where you say, this is the one. This is where I'm going for it. This is where I'm going to try to make a few dollars out of this. I'm going to launch it. I'm going to get some hype going. I'm going to do a very iterative approach where I do what people say they want more of, etc. And that might be the thing that you say, okay, this is going to take me 6 months or a year. Preferably don't start out on a journey that you think is more than a year. I think that's too much. Too many things can go wrong with that. It might end up getting stretched a little bit, but if you get there and say, well, it's taken me a month to do one feature, so I'm going to multiply that by 20 and do 20 features, now it'll take me 20 months. That's, I think, too big a project for that stage. Unless you get there and say, I'm going to team up with my couple of friends, and therefore, hopefully we'll get quicker through that process. So just a general roadmap for you to follow, I think, if you're newish and you're looking to gradually expand into larger projects.
By the way, there is nobody that's ever successfully said, I want this project to take exactly this long, and then it does.
Yeah,
It just
that's right.
doesn't happen. So however long you think it's going to take, it's not going to take that long. It's very likely going to take longer. Almost every single game, even professional AAA people that have management teams that have been in the industry for 30 years, they still go overtime and over budget. Like it's so much so that overtime and over budget are actually included in the budget these days because like they expect things to fully
Yeah.
go over. So just keep that in mind. Like that's the problem is if you think it's 3 weeks, it might be a 3 month project. And if you think it's 3 months, it might be a 3 year project. So in the beginning, you just have so much less of an ability to gauge that stuff that you have to understand that going in, that whatever estimate you put on it is going to be wrong. So try to do as small as possible.
Yep. Nice. What other questions we got here? Let's see if we can get any other questions pointed in Lucy's direction. So at some point, Lucy needs to head off to bed because for me, it's morning. For Tim, it's afternoon, although technically that's his morning. And for Lucy, it's like into the wee hours. So if we've got any other questions for Lucy, throw them her way.
30
what
to
questions
50%
do we
extra
have
time,
for
Gary.
Lucy? Yes. Lucy, question for you. Do you feel that you have to play video games in order to work in an industry that's to do with video games? Is that a case of, in your particular role, are you needing to play Fortnite, 10 hours a day to function well in managing the community of game development students and from other people that you know in this sort of general industry? Do you have to be a gamer? And if you're not a gamer, then, well, just too bad.
No, as my 14-year-old son will testify, putting me in front of a game is not a good idea. I attempted to play Fortnite with him during lockdown, which was me in a crouching crab position, running around, and him building things around me because I couldn't even get the controller to make me stand up. So no, you don't have to be a gamer. I think the thing is that I love about this community is that everybody is here because they love games and they're passionate about this aspect. Nobody's here because they're forced to be here, and so it's a really positive space to be in. And I don't think you have to be into games to appreciate that positivity and enjoy working with you guys and with the community and with everybody who's involved in it. And it's hard to say whether that's unusual. Obviously, a lot of the people on our team are gamers and come from a game development background, and that's what makes you guys all awesome at what you do. I think maybe sometimes it helps that I'm not a gamer because we have so many beginners that join us that maybe
Right.
I speak more of a beginner language. So maybe that's helpful, but yeah, not a gamer. Mario Kart, I rocked at Mario Kart, but that's my limit.
I really think not being a gamer is a huge advantage, actually, and especially in a role like yours because you do talk to so many beginners. Rick and I, we've been back and forth 100 times on the fact that like it's really complicated to have instructors that really know their stuff because they'll go into a course sometimes and they'll just be like, yeah, so just go to do this wizardry and then it's done. And you're like, hold on, you can't put a course out like that. You just did like 10 million things and pressed a bunch of keyboard keys that we didn't even know existed. Like you can't, it gets complicated. And sometimes the more experience you get, the more you take it for granted and you forget what it was like to be at the very beginner level. So the language you use is very kind of not inclusive to people just learning the thing. So yeah, in a weird way, it's an advantage, I think.
Yeah. The other question I wanted to ask you, Lucy, to give a different perspective to what Tim and I have talked about already. We're talking about small projects, large projects, and larger projects. There's a chance you're going to be working with other people, whether it's a contractor or maybe you partner up with someone. In today's day and age of pandemic, everyone is doing what the three of us have been doing for many years. For me, it's more than a decade that I've been working on remote teams and working from home and home office, all that kind of stuff. What advice would you have for people who are looking to work from home remotely and stay sane? No, I'm not accusing you of staying sane. Just a general
Good.
inquiry to give a different perspective. To What have you found that works for you? In the whole remote working situation.
I know it's quite cliched, but having a routine is really helpful. First of all, getting dressed, getting up and getting dressed is really helpful for going to work. These guys know, because we have very early, well, for me, very early team meetings where I'm often partly pajamaed and not bringing my best self. But getting dressed is really helpful. Having a routine that you try and stick to every day, leaving the computer and going for a walk, trying to talk to people in real life as well as on a screen. Yeah, all of that really. I mean, it's amazing. I'm so fortunate and blessed to be able to have the flexibility of working like this and raising my son, and just like personally, that I think it's a brilliant way to work. And I think it's one of the highlights of the pandemic that more companies, and culturally it's becoming more accepted, but there are some downsides of losing that human interaction. So trying to I think that the routine and trying to talk to people, that's helpful, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what I found myself doing a lot lately is making sure that I have at least one meeting, sometimes two meetings a week with someone I've not met before, to do networking, just to be like, hey, let's have a chat and get to know you. Because I think in a office environment, you're meeting people, you're meeting new people, someone's coming into the office for a meeting with that person, you say hi as they walk past, you're meeting the person when you go to get lunch, you're interacting. And particularly in an industry where collaboration is useful. So making games, or for us, we teach people how to make games, or in nearly every industry, I think it's useful to have a network of people that you know. So I think just a message to folks out there, something that I found useful is if you find yourself, you know what, it's been weeks since I've talked to anyone or met someone or had a conversation outside of just, the people that live in my house, then go find someone to have a conversation with. And people watching at the moment might say, well, I don't even know, how do I do that? The people in the chat, if you see someone who's interesting in the chat, like, hey, what are you up to? Let's meet up and just, I don't know, have a Discord. You don't have to necessarily meet face to face via Zoom or something, but just have a Discord chat. So meet people, say hi to people, connect with people, because I think collaborations help larger projects go well, and collaborations often come from a chance meeting. And it's a little bit like online dating. If anyone out there has done online dating, you've got to send 100 messages to get the 30 people that respond. And of the 30 people that respond, you might get 10 people that you say, these seem interesting enough to meet up with. And of those 10 that you think are interesting enough to meet up with, maybe 4 of them think you're interesting enough to meet up with. And then of the 4 that you meet up with, 2 of them are just like freaks and completely not what you're expecting. And of the 2 remaining, one of them thinks you're a freak that they weren't expecting, and you find the one. And it took 100 people to find the one. I think it's the same with teaming up with people on projects. And the best way to start that is on a game jam, to work on a game jam together. Hey, do you want to make some art? I'll make some stuff and we'll see how it goes. If it doesn't work out, no love lost. It's easy. You can say, thanks. Nice chatting with you.
Look at you, Rick, looping it all the way back round to cover the topic of what we're doing and the game. All of this, you're like a professional. I know you pretend that you're not, but like sometimes, whew.
You know what, Lucy, I appreciate you saying that. And I have to give credit to Tim, because Tim shipped me this seat some time ago that has electrodes built into it. And if I get off topic, every now and again, you see me going like that, because Tim's got a controller. He's just like, so if I'm like, oh, let's talk about something. Oh, okay, back into large versus small projects. So,
it works out.
Hi, Uncle Tim. I'm good. is watching.
Just on what you said, I think if anybody is thinking about having a teammate join them, I think the upcoming GameDev.tv Game Jam is a really good place to test them out, because game jams give you an isolated kind of game to work with somebody on. And you know what? You may be really good friends with this person, but you join them on a game and they just suck as a teammate. And some people do. It's fine. Like, it's just not a person that you want to work on a project for 2 or 3 years with, right? And you learn that in a small amount of time instead of a large amount of time. And it's not even like, sometimes it's just like you guys have different ideas, or you don't know how to compromise effectively. Or, part of the problem could be you, right? Like, if 2 people don't know how to compromise, or even if only one person knows how to compromise, they don't mesh well with someone that can't, because one-sided compromises aren't compromises. They're just kind of giving in. So, yeah, testing somebody out on a smaller scale, just like you would test out a feature on a smaller scale, I think works out really well.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think you have to have fun along the way with that, whatever you do. If it's a large project, let me take this a slightly different way. So, I'll cough first, not COVID, hopefully. I think there's a lot of people who get there and say, when I cross the finishing line, I'll give myself the acknowledgement that I won, that I finished the thing, that, job well done. And between now and then, I'm gonna berate myself and say that it's not good enough yet. It's not finished. I haven't got to that point. So those folks are trying to motivate themselves by saying, you're not there yet. Don't celebrate. You've still got another, whatever, 20 features to go till your game's done. Your game's not good enough. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. And then eventually you launch it and hopefully you say it's good enough. Although there's a very, very, very high likelihood you're still going to say it's not good enough, because making games is creative and it's tough to do. And you never necessarily get it to the point where you as a creator feel it's good enough. But I think that's a really, really flawed way to motivate yourself, because you spend whatever, if it's a short project, you might spend 10 days. If it's a long one, you might spend 3 years feeling like you're losing. And I think that's a really unhealthy mental state to be in. So rather than looking at a big project and saying, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. Maybe one day it will be good enough. You need to look at the things that you did, inputs, not outputs. So, okay, this week I'm going to fix all of the bugs to do with the shooting mechanic. And you work on those bugs and you fix those bugs. Now, I fixed the bugs. You're not saying to yourself, is my game amazing, 5-star, world class? You're not looking at it that way. You're not saying, have I launched it? You're saying, did I fix the things that I set out to fix? And you give yourself a big high five and celebrate that. I think you have to have a lot of small wins based upon the work that you do, as opposed to the output of, is my game good? Never measure yourself by, is my game good? You have to measure yourself by, did I do the work that I committed to do? That way you can be a winner the whole way through the process, rather than feeling like a loser or losing the whole way through the process.
The problem with is my game good too is that to someone that hates your genre, your game is garbage. But to someone that loves your genre, your game is amazing. So like, it's very individualistic and not only that, but your perception of it, your clarity goes down over time.
It changes.
So you start seeing all the things that are wrong with your project, not all the good things that made it awesome.
Yeah, you know what? And just on that, Tim, I find that if I'm deep in the mechanics of things, I tend to hate what I'm working on. It's not good enough, not good enough, not good enough. I need to balance a little bit of gameplay with a little bit of visuals, because I find that when I put in some visuals, I'm like, oh, this is getting better. You can see it. You're like, oh, it's shinier. There's some grass, and the grass is swaying, and the character is not clipping through its arm. So I think in a bigger project as well, don't spend 80% of the time building the stuff and then 20% of the time making it look pretty. Spend 2% building a thing, 2% making it look pretty, 2% build, 2% like that. The is very important in that process, so that
totally,
you're making it feel good as you go as well.
I have to do that or I can't make games at all. Like the other day I was working on my game and I was doing some UI button stuff. And I'm like, okay, the button works when you click on it, but it doesn't highlight when you hover it. It doesn't move when you press it. I'm like, I can't stand that. So I have to like go in and make it like highlight and make it pretty and make it click and make it, do all that stuff. And then it's like, oh, okay, now it feels like a button. It feels good.
Yeah.
And that stuff's important because like, it's so discouraging when your stuff doesn't feel good. But on top of that, what's even worse is like if you give it to somebody for feedback, that kind of stuff will stand out more than the game bugs. So someone will just continually tell you your buttons don't feel like buttons when
Yeah.
really what you needed is feedback on like your game, but they just
Mm.
can't get past that button thing. So that sucks too. Is like it's almost like a wasted feedback session, you know, because people can't get past certain stupid things that you could have done ahead of time, like
Yeah.
placeholder art. Oh my god, never give. I did this mistake. I had all of my game's art in there, but I added one little cannon enemy that was placeholder, and I threw it in there, and I got feedback from like 10 people. Every single one of them, all they said was, "You really should improve the art on the cannon."
Yeah.
I was just like,
Ignore it.
I know that. I wanted feedback on everything else. Like, what was?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you gotta be careful with that stuff. Make sure it's all of similar kind of quality. If you're gonna do pizzazz on one thing, make sure you kind of do it on everything, so one thing is not way better than the other stuff, because then people start to hold everything else to that same standard of, you know, completionist.
Yes, I agree. There was a question early on, I remember, from Lottie, I think, just asking about in your project. I think, Lottie, apologies if I get this wrong. And side note, Carlos, no, I am not related to Phil Collins. Thank you for asking. I do get that a lot. Um, Lottie was asking about when's the right time to consider story or narrative in your game process. And I know, Tim, you've worked on larger indie games and you've got some story weaved into that. Do you get there and say, okay, building features, and then okay, now I need to figure out what's the story? Oh, now you're going to say, right, now I need a cut scene. Is it mushed together, or is it a particular phase where you say, okay, now I've got permission to focus a bit more on the story or the narrative?
It, you know, it's been all over the place. With Philophobia, there was a clear kind of story arc, but the specifics of the story weren't kind of there. Battle Barn has, it started with a concept based on one of my other games, but what was interesting is having made this whole combat, it really started to feel like it was a like an animal fight club. So I just went with that concept and made that the whole
Yep.
story. Like I scrapped everything I had before and just turned it into an intergalactic animal fight club. And then like I've actually started with narrative a few times too in game jams. Like, okay, I want to make a game about this thing that does this, and then all that. So it really, really depends. Generally, I've found that my games that don't have story are not as strong as the ones that do. And I just mean thematically, and I mean like personality wise, just because it just doesn't come off as strong. So I would definitely include.
Oh,
What's that?
something went
Uh
crackly.
oh.
Did your microphone just break, Lucy? Yeah.
Oh no! Oh no!
Oh. Okay.
I think it did.
Yeah, it's yours.
Wait, I think
Okay.
Lucy was gonna head
I
off.
think that's a coincidence because Lucy just messaged us and said, I'm off to bed. And then mysteriously, her microphone broke.
It's just
Mhm.
okay.
Cool.
Have a good
Thanks for
night,
joining us
Lucy.
today, Lucy.
Thank you for joining us. It was
Thanks.
amazing.
Good to have you here with us.
Bye bye.
Improved our live cast immensely. So it's not just Tim and
Gonna
I. Oh, now
check
it's just
that
Tim and I.
box.
And we're like, oh,
Our
now it's big Tim and I. Oh, no, now it's normal size Tim and I. Yeah. We are going to blame the Mac again. I think blame the Mac for everything. Anywho, yeah, narrative stuff. You know, it's really interesting. If you're making a game where story and narrative is intended to be the star of the show, then you want to work on it early. So if you're making a game like It Takes Two, or what was the one I played? Get Out. No, that's a movie. The one where the two prisoners and you're
A Way Out.
A Way Out. Thank you. You know, that's just a movie with a couple of buttons you click every now
Yeah.
and again. So then it needs to be core into how you design it. And I think with any of these things, you want to have your design integrated where the story is integrated into the mechanics. So do that right at the start. If it's more of that narrative driven type game where
Yeah.
story is important, if it's a game where, you know, you're flying around shooting spaceships and you want to have a little bit of a theme to it, then I think you can do that later on after you've already said, I'm definitely going to make this game. the best way to integrate story is to have it make a difference to the game and not just be
Yeah.
flavor. Because if it's flavor, 98% of people aren't going to care about,
Right.
about the troglodytes were wiped out back 1,000 years ago. It's like, I don't care. Just let me shoot stuff and blow stuff up.
It has to tie into the why of what you're doing.
Yep.
I
Yeah.
think there's an important point you brought up, though. You said story and narrative, and I do think those are two different things. So you can have story without narrative, right? Like, I think it's interesting. Depending on the game, you can have a lot of stuff that sets up the world. So in my case, I've got an intergalactic animal fight club where you've been kidnapped and forced to fight, and the only way out is to win, right? So that's how you get free. So that sets up the whole game. What am I doing? Well, I'm trying to win this little fight club so I can get out, right? I don't necessarily need narrative and like cutscenes and all this stuff on top of that because I kind of gave you the why. Like, could I do them? Sure, but I don't necessarily need them. Whereas, like, sometimes people will add morsels of story that don't correlate to the why or what you're doing, and those are the stuff most people don't care about. Like, if you put a little like console in the middle of your world of like you can learn about the cool stuff, but it's like if I don't care about the world or I don't understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, it doesn't make a big difference.
I think I think as well, if you work on your game for a year, you have such a strong relationship with your game. You know the ins and outs of it. And as you're working away, you give little stories to it. So you're working on your levels and you're like, okay, where is my level? Because you're working on for hours and hours and hours. So you start to generate this whole backstory and this world and this universe. And it's really easy to forget that when a player comes along to your game, they've got 2 minutes experience with your game and they don't care about that your grass is a particular species of grass. Like you do because you've taken, weeks making the grass. So I think you need to be really cautious about not giving too much of that theme, flavor, story, input information if it doesn't help the experience.
But I will say too, like really well done story, I think, especially when it ties into the core of the game, is so amazing. I'll never forget the first time I played Halo because I'm like, that's what a weird name for a game. Like it's a space marine. That sounds like it should be an angel. Like, what is going on? Halo. But then it ties into the ring world and like that whole planet, and that's what the aliens call it. And it's like, oh, like that's cool, right? Like that really made like it's a big part of the whole overarching concept.
Yeah.
And it really tied into everything. So that really made a huge impact on my implementation.
That's
How I
interesting
took
though.
the game.
That's a real AAA way of looking at it as well, because AAA, if you've got, I don't know, tens of millions of people who are going to play your game, some people are going to get really deep into the lore of your game and really deep into the backstory, and they're going to need that, and then they're going to propagate that, and you want to have sequels, and there's a comic book, and maybe you can make a movie one day. So those things do take on a lot more significance and importance. I think if you're just one person making an indie game, if you've got time, great. But a lot of people are just never going to get to the fact that Halo is what to do with ringworms, you said. And, they're just, they're never going to reach that point. Boop. So then they're just never going to reach there. But I think for me, the best indie game story example to model yourself after of all time. Are you ready for this? Get your pens and paper ready to take a note. This is a good one. Is the original Angry Birds, the best story narrative in the history of all time, I think, because what happens is you start the game and there's one image. It just took an artist however long to make one image, one sketch, one drawing of, let's see if I can remember correctly, I forget which way it scrolls, but it kind of pans across and you see it one way or the other. I'm probably going to get the direction wrong, but you see bunch of birds that are angry, and you pan across and there's a bunch of pigs that have stolen the birds' eggs. There it is. You got it. Like you get the emotion straight away.
Yeah.
Good guys, bad guys, a reason to care. I don't like them. I want to go get them. And all it took was one image to be created and a little bit of a pan across. There was no text. There's no narrator. There's no detail. Welcome to the world of Astrodor. None of that stuff. It's just Angry Birds, and it's in the name. Even better when you can have your name match the experience of what you're playing. There's some Angry Birds and there's some naughty pigs. Go. So that for me is genius. I think if you're looking to introduce any sort of story, you can do it at that level. And
Yeah.
Tim, for you, you've got a similar sort of setup. It's like the animals are fighting, go, like that kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and so you don't need to tell me what the home planet is called. I don't care. I have no relationship with that at this stage. But I do know I'm an angry bird and pigs are bad. So
Yeah.
anyway.
You know what's interesting too is like I think the story is more important for certain genres than other genres as well. So like I have a game called Cyberpunk, which is kind of on pause at the moment, but it's a game about hacking into computer systems, right? And at first I thought it was just cool to hack. So like I had a bunch of like it's a representation of hacking. So it's like you're in a dungeon kind of deal where you move left to right, and viruses are represented by actual enemies and stuff like that. But um it was really important for players to understand why they're hacking systems. And I didn't expect that because I was just like, everybody likes hacking. It's cool, it's fun. But like for some reason, people were extra. They want to know like what corporations are they taking down, or like who are they stealing data from, or like that stuff was like extra important to them.
Yeah.
So it's important to kind of understand the genre that you're going in and the type of
Yeah.
narrative that you're going for, and
Mm.
specifically with like cyberpunk type of like hacking, people really like they care about that kind of narrative of
Yeah.
like taking
I
down
think
the
because
mega
I think
corporations.
you can relate that to real life
Yeah.
as well. You're like, yeah, who are we taking down? You can
Right.
get more into the story, um,
Yeah.
by giving it a flavor. Yeah, that's a good point. And so you need to ask your players, what bits of this do you care about? What bits do you want to know more about? Angry Birds. Like, do you want to know the names of the birds? Not really. That's
Right.
the yellow one. That's the pink one. That's the eyebrow one. You don't. You give your own names to it. In Minecraft, do you want to know? Why the creepers blow up? Not really. They kind of look funny and they blow up. So I think there's a lot of that stuff that is just not needed or not necessary. But you're saying, I want to know which corporation I'm taking down because I want to know what awful thing they did that's
Right.
inspiring me to go take them down because that's important. It's important as a
Yeah.
hacker to have your motivation because inherently hacking is not like, pulling a slingshot, the joy is in that motion. Like, pull it back. There we go. Like
Right.
that was joyful. You don't really need to know that, the yellow bird's name is, Bernard or something. It doesn't really matter.
Right.
But when you're hacking, you're like, the joy is in how am I going to hack them?
The
Like,
result
how,
and like
what's the
taking down the
pain I'm
corporation too.
inflicting on them by my
Right.
craft
Exactly.
here? Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it was interesting because I never had really thought about that. And yeah, it was way more important than I thought it was. So
What do you think? This is probably someone threw draggy dog in the conversation again. What's the equivalent in that game? So we've talked about this a lot. You've got a dog, and the funny thing, the nugget of wisdom that we've started with in that game, wisdom's the wrong word. The nugget of hey, that'd be neat. The remarkability is seeing a dog dragging itself around, with its front legs, with its back legs in the air on its butt. There's a magic in that moment because it's funny and we kind of know it and we've seen it and yeah, haha, let's make a game about that. But now, what are we presenting to the player as to why you care about the dog? You've had a laugh at the dog. Why do we care about the dog? And how can we link that into the nature of the fact that the dog is dragging itself around? So the reason has to be do something to do with that. Maybe, maybe the dog is stuck. Maybe the dog is, getting revenge. Maybe the dog just has worms. And like, what's the meaning behind it? I think we don't have to put that in a big story. Like if you look at the Bennett Foddy getting over it, the guy in the cauldron lifting himself up, he wants to get up the mountain and he's stuck in a cauldron and he's got a hammer.
yeah,
Okay, well that all kind of fits and it works. Why is he in a cauldron?
bizarre, but it
I don't know. He can't walk. So what is it about our dog that links it together to what we're doing with our game and makes sense and gives it some sort of
yeah.
reason?
I think we mentioned before that we really wanted the game to feel mischievous, right? Like causing chaos. And I think the problem with making a dog sick or like it triggers a different kind of emotional response that we don't want
Mm,
in a mischievous game. We don't want you to feel bad for the dog. but we want you to kind of get a little bit of revenge. So I think giving him some kind of mean owner might be interesting. And the
Yeah.
owner's not the nicest, and then it's like, okay, now you want to drag your booty all over that carpet,
What if
right?
you
Make his life miserable.
what if you evolve on that? So if it's the age old, my owner is mean and I'm the good guy, but I'm getting revenge on the mean one. I think there's something in that. It's a standard kind of good versus evil. What if we pushed it? And a little bit of what I'm trying to do here is show the thought process of what you and we're on a team, we're bouncing. What's the story? This is literally how we would do it. You look at the reason to glue it all together. But what can we do that's a step more mischievous than good and evil? Because if it's evil and I'm being mischievous, like the horrible owner, I'm kind of gonna want to burn his house down. Like just dragging my butt around doesn't seem significant enough. But if my owners are maybe a bit more sweet and innocent, and I'm doing this just to be a jerk, there might be something more compelling as the player. You're this mischievous dog, and everyone's like, "Oh no, what have you done?" And you're like, "Ha ha, gotcha." To allow people to express their inner jerk, because often mischievous is on a target that doesn't necessarily deserve it, if that makes sense.
Maybe they give you treats every time they think you're sick. So
Yeah. Maybe they fed you chocolate because dogs aren't supposed to have chocolate and it gives them the runs.
you're
Or it
getting
kills
revenge
them
on
or
them for
something.
that.
I don't know.
Something as wholesome as like accidentally. Yeah, chocolate I think is a little more dangerous.
Yes.
But
Or it could
they
be
fed you
too
something.
much love. Like the little, the little kid is putting bows in the dog's hair and brushing the dog and maybe put some pink in, coloring. I don't know. Some sort of pampering the dog and emasculating the dog. The dog's like, "Oh, stop making me, look cutesy. I don't want to be cutesy. I'm actually a tough dog. Like, let me show you how tough I am." And the owner, "Oh, isn't that cute?"
Someone in the chat said dog teaches the cat how to drag its butt also. But I think it might be cool to have a cat overlord. Like maybe the cat says, listen,
Oh,
I know how to get you to the park, but you gotta do this.
or maybe it's the age-old dog versus cats. So the dog's doing this and trying to get the blame on the cat. So the whole goal of the
There we
game
go.
is
Yeah.
to get the cat in trouble. So you're dragging your butt around, you're knocking things over, you're grabbing fur balls, cat fur balls, and trying to, whatever. Yeah. So blame the cat is because I think that's a more interesting good versus evil, because it's not necessarily evil. It's a Mac versus PC, isn't it? Dog versus cat. Maybe you can
And the
choose
cat
where
can
you.
be very much one of those evil, but like in front of the people, he's like
Mm,
good. He like, yeah. I like getting revenge on the cat. I think that's great.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
how did we end up brainstorming draggy dog games though? Like what
How
is
did we
this
not,
live
Tim?
cast?
We're talking about
This
story
is
and large projects. Well,
we're talking about
define it.
Q&As and Lucy was here and then we got an alien
Define a
signal
large
in the middle of
project
it.
though, because we've been talking about Draggy Dog for months and months. So is that a large project? We haven't actually started development.
Yeah, I don't think it counts as a project until we
I don't
start on
know.
it.
I think there's a lot of ideas that we all have that we kind of nurture and we kind of cook for a while in our head until one day we're like, I'm going to make this thing. And because you've cooked it for a while, maybe it's ready to go. So, yeah.
We definitely got the motivation down. I like mischievous game about a draggy dog that tries to get the cat in trouble.
Yes.
I think that's definitely solid.
Maybe
We have
try.
to figure out gameplay, but
Yeah, exactly. Well, yes. Push X to drag.
just the sole game. Just
Yeah. Awesome.
I'm shocked.
Cool. So
No, I'm still against the idea. Okay, I just really enjoy game design, and he roped me into this without me knowing what happened. Rick's charm does that.
yes.
It's not cool.
Yeah. Cool. So if you guys have any other questions, we'll take one or two more questions. I don't know if we've been successful in talking about the pros and cons of large projects, but we've talked about them a little bit.
Yeah, we kind of maybe there wasn't much there to cover a whole 90 minutes, but we talked about it a bit. I think we went through story and stuff too. That could have been a whole different live cast, but
you know what? Next
guys,
week, for
3 and
anyone,
1.
for anyone still listening at the moment, next week we are planning on having a gentleman who works as a publisher. So we can ask publisher type questions for anyone who's curious about how it works and the process, where you need to get your game to, how do you impress a publisher, just what is a publisher and what do publishers do. You don't necessarily need to be in the market for a publisher or even want to publish your game, but it's kind of handy. We're in this as often as hobbyists, and it's kind of an interesting part of the process. So we're going to have a chat to someone about that who's an actual real live video game publisher.
Yeah, and if you already posted a question and we missed it, feel free to just repost it real quick so we can see it. But that'll be exciting. Publishers are super interesting because it's a different way to make games. You don't necessarily have to struggle to make the game and do all this stuff up front by yourself. You can actually have a partner that can help you and potentially make you more successful. So it's cool.
So question from Wargaming Kim, what do you do when your project is larger than expected and you're not sure you can finish it?
Quit.
Quit while you're ahead.
It's just, it's always larger than expected. That's what I was saying before. It's always going to be. I think you've got two options. Well, you've got three options. One is descope, right? So cut the scope back, make it smaller than you think it is. Two, dedicate to finishing it as it is, right? And if you don't think you can finish it, it's probably not a good option. Or three is to quit and maybe put it on the shelf for a little bit. I generally would always descope stuff, especially if you end up in that scenario where you don't know, how long it's going to take or how much longer it is. Descoping is very hard. It's very emotionally taxing because we know you want the 10 features in that game and you're very attached to that one animal that does that weird thing. But you have to descope. Battle Barn originally was going to be 10 factions. It's now down to 5. And you constantly have to cut stuff because you have to fit within the scope, right? So,
yeah, exactly. Ask yourself the question, of all of these features, if I was to only have one, which one would it be? So someone could actually still play a game. And you're like, well, it's going to be a terrible game. Yeah. But just if there was only one, which one would it be? And then make sure that that one is finished. And then say, okay, what's the next thing that my game has to have or else it just can't work at all? And get that one in. And at some point, you just need to put a line and say all these things don't get to go in there. And if you're not sure what those features should be, then show your game or your idea or your demo or your prototype to other people and ask them, which bits do you think are most interesting? And then put the love into the interesting bits. Just chop out the rest.
And to be honest, a lot of people think that less scope equals worse game, but there's a lot of games out there that are better because they have a smaller scope. Sometimes larger scope means you added too much stuff, and too much stuff makes the game muddy and it makes it confusing and it makes it not as clean and tight as it could be. Really clean indie game, like Unpacking is a beautiful example. It's a game where you unpack stuff out of a box and you put it on a shelf. That's the whole game. There's no roguelike map. There's no endless mode. There's no super awesome multiplayer. It's that's the whole game. And the game has done very, very well because people enjoy that simplicity.
Yep. Question from Creepy OG. For a solo dev, would HTML5 games be a good start? Well, let's ask Mr. Tim Construct3
Mr.
Rustwick.
HTML5 games guy. I think that matters less. The technology matters less than the... Yeah, so HTML5, it depends. If you're going to program HTML5 from scratch, you might as well just program other stuff in Unity or anything. When you're beginning, I think the most important thing is availability of docs and resources. One of the cool things about something like Unity is that Unity has all of these docs and resources and tutorials and courses and all this stuff. But that being said, something like Construct is, for a beginner, is super simple to use and super simple to understand. You can add behaviors onto stuff. There's a lot of pre-built behaviors in there. So if you want to make a platformer, you can just add a platform behavior on a cube and you've got a dude that's running and jumping, and that's super, super quick. So I would definitely recommend Construct 3 for people that maybe are interested in making games as a newbie that maybe aren't interested in the programming aspect.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, asking about HTML5 game is, are we talking about the way it was developed or the way it's published? Because making a
Right.
game that you put as a web game, you can do through many places. Unity, for example, you're talking about Construct. So I think making a game that's for web based is great. Making a game in HTML5, I guess so, but you don't need to. I think it's a more difficult. It's easier to start in an engine and start
Yeah.
playing around with stuff. The whole point is it doesn't matter at all, as Tim was saying, what you do it in. You just have to start a thing, get competent enough in that language or tool or engine to be able to make some really basic mechanics. Just start that process of finding the joy in moving a thing around and bumping into a thing and triggering a thing and having a score. And I'm in the process of creating a course to teach Scratch, or a course teaching Scratch. And Scratch is great for kids, for people starting out, for people scared about coding, for people who just want to get there. And within literally 10 minutes, drag a thing. It's all block based visual programming. Drag a thing, drag a thing, drag a thing. Oh wow, now I've got an infinite runner where I can just jump over things as they come into the screen. You learn a lot about programming by having those really basic tools, and you learn a lot about game tuning. This is the really important aspect of it. And I'm working through this, teaching my kids at the moment how to use Scratch. And they'll get a thing in there. Oh, look, this thing is now happening. Come play my game, Dad. I play. I'm like, cool. It's just the same thing over and over and over. Well done. But what's the challenge? Like, how is this difficult? Maybe you should have your thing speed up or slow down or have 10 of them instead of one of them. So that's the ongoing muscle you need to train to be really good at making games. We think it's about figuring out the technical flow of how do I write the code to get the thing doing the thing. That's, I think, more of a known quantity because there's often an answer to the question. How do I make my character bump into the wall? You can get an answer. How do I make it interesting to make my character bump into the wall is a lot less obvious. It's more subjective. So you need to be practicing that in whatever system, doesn't matter at all. It can be in Scratch where you're just saying, how do I make it fun to get to a score of 10? That's all, this is not
Yeah.
fun at the moment. I need more enemies. They need to go faster or slower, or, the character's too big or too small. That's what you need to start really working on as early as you can.
And Jonas Tyroller has a fantastic video on this. It's called and we make this button fun to press. And it's just a button that he continually iterates on until it's awesome.
Cool.
And so I linked that in the chat.
Yeah. Cool. You should show us that anyway, too late now. Screen sharing. One day we'll actually use the power of our video.
We'll be fancy.
Cool. Awesome. I think that's good for today. We've reached our allotted time before we get booted out of the internet. So, metaphorically speaking. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Fantastic conversation as always. Tim, thank you for hanging out. Lucy's gone to bed already, although she's
Thank you, Lucy.
She's secretly watching and listening right at the moment just to see. She doesn't want to miss a moment, I'm sure. So thanks everyone for joining us today. We'll be back next week at the same time. And as I mentioned before, we're going to be talking about publishers with a publisher, so you get some ideas about where you can get to with your game development journey. So